In recent weeks, we've seen a lot of relevant introductions to Resident Evil franchises that many fans have been waiting for a long time. From the introduction of Resident Evil Village content in the form of Winter's expansion to the unveiling of the restored version of Resident Evil 4, which has excited and hyped most fans for the year ahead. Today, we're going to look at Resident Evil Village expansions, including Shadows of Rose, and put it under a magnifying glass as this expander has the potential to become one of the best added content in franchise history. The Mercenaries section is very popular among franchise fans, and personally in all the versions that this mode has been present, I have devoted a lot of time to its experience, but unfortunately after years' absence a very poor return in the 8th version and was one of the least content parts of the franchise's Mercenaries, so that the most banal features of this section, including selection of characters, who even appeared in the 3rd version of the series, was useless. Fortunately, creators are set to add a variety of content to the sector, which can have a significant impact on the overall experience of the sector. According to the creators, characters Chris Redfield, Alcina Dimitrescu and Carl Heisenberg are set to be added to the game mode, each of which has its own type and style of combat, and even you will have the ability to use some of the outstanding features of these characters, which will definitely provide a very enjoyable experience. For example, player in the role of Chris will have the ability to use the air support feature using a laser that also benefited during the game, which can give a great variety to this section. Heisenberg and Lady Dimitrescu also have the special features they used throughout the game's story in this section. In addition to the new characters, new steps or so-called stages will be added to this section, which will definitely multiply the value of the experience of this mode. Franchise fans had requested the addition of a third-person mode earlier in the introduction of the 7th edition of Capcom, and eventually the creators met that demand from fans at Village. This is a huge change not only for the 8th edition, but even for the upcoming original versions of franchises. Perhaps Capcom is trying to revert to the third person of the former franchise and maybe even release the next version completely in the third person. From the outset, one of the reasons Capcom released the 7th version in the first person was that the player could mostly position himself as Ethan, a completely normal person, and experience a purer fear, which is why they strongly avoided showing his face. Now that Ethan's story is over, we see that Capcom is changing its procedures so that it has even developed Shadows of Rose from the very beginning in general in the third-person mode. It is also likely that in the next version we will see Chris as the protagonist, in which case being the first person of the game will not make any sense. Personally, I think Capcom will now, even if it wants to make the upcoming Resident Evil titles first person, it will probably allow the gamers to experience them as third person. Apart from these issues, the creators have made a lot of changes to the overall structure of the game, so that the third-person experience is polished and enjoyable like remake versions. It is likely that we will see new cutscene in the game that show Ethan as a third person, and finally we can officially see his face in different situations and with different emotions. This will definitely help to connect the player with this character, and I will definitely be back to the Resident Evil Village experience when it comes to this feature. But the fictional expander Resident Evil Village, which we've been expecting for about a year, is called Shadows of Rose, and it's actually a sequel to the story of the 8th edition. There were many possibilities surrounding this DLC, including addressing the Chris and BSAA story or bringing back Ada Wong, but if you ask me, this was Capcom's best choice. And then I'll talk more about it, but in general, it's better to deal with characters like Chris or Ada in the original versions of franchises than in a DLC. In this DLC we will play Rosemary Winters, and its story begins immediately after epilogue of the 8th edition, 16 years after the original game story. Rose has been constantly ridiculed as an eccentric throughout her life because of the powers she possesses, so she intends to lose her powers forever by entering the consciousness of Megamycete so that she can live a normal life. To date, almost all of the additional content of the story that has been presented for different versions of franchises has been of desirable quality and very attractive stories that focused more on the story of their own version, and until now we have never experienced such a time leap in franchises, and I think many people are unaware of or about the high potential and importance of this DLC. If you remember, several months ago, in one of my videos, I mentioned that it might be the protagonist of the 9th version as Rose Winter, and Capcom wants to finish this trilogy with this character. But after introducing the DLC this is somewhat violated, which in my opinion would be very much in the best interests of franchises. But why do I think so? Shadows of Rose finishes the continuation of the story of the 8th edition, which revolves around Rose, referred to in epilogue, and opens the way for old characters to return to the future version as protagonists. It also prevents a time leap in the 9th edition, giving Capcom the opportunity to continue the story of franchise present. At the same time, If Capcom does well to take advantage of Shadows of Rose's fictional potential, it can not only fill many of the fictional holes of the two recent versions, but it can even make Rose a lovely character for fans. It should also not be forgotten that Chris has played a prominent role in Rose's life, and therefore I hope Capcom in SOR will also go into the details of the relationship between the two characters and portray it. On the other hand, this direct connection between the two characters may lead us to see more Rose in different franchise titles in the future. Chris is about 65 years old at the time of narrating the SOR story, and I personally would be very interested to see Chris in the body of a father figure for Rose and see the connection between them. Let's have a hint of Megamycete and its role in this DLC. Many may think that all SOR events are merely going on in Rose's mind and are in compra trivial, but not at all. Megamycete is a living organ, and as you probably know, part of the conscious pronoun has trapped all of its victims, and its world is not limited to the laws of time and space, which is why in the 7th edition of Ethan, he was able to talk to Jack or meet Evelyn again in version 8. None of this was merely a mind-made Ethan dream, but was possible in the Megamycete world by communicating with a part of the consciousness of these people left in this world. This part of people's minds can include their good qualities or the evil part of their minds. That's why Jack looked very normal in his conversation with Ethan, because in fact his positive temperament was stuck in Megamycete and he communicated with Ethan, and in the real world there was only one angry shell left of him. This can also be extended to Duke. If you've watched the trailer for the introduction of this DLC, you've seen the sinister version of Duke. Duke may have been quite the opposite of Jack, and the positive part of his self-conscious pronoun was caught in the real world and his evil part in Megamycete, and now Rose has to stand up to the evil Duke. Also, in the trailer, we saw a rather darker version of Dimitrescu Castle, perhaps referring to the more prominent element of fear in this DLC. Since there doesn't seem to be any other content in development for this version, Chris's story and the flows around BSAA are likely to be narrated in the next version, and as I said, this could open the way for the return of many of franchise's favorite characters in the upcoming version. In general, Shadows of Rose has a very high fictional potential, and it is important to see how deep the Capcom gives it. Personally, I am extremely pleased with this Capcom choice for DLC, and I impatiently expect it. According to Capcom, Resident Evil Verse will also be released at the same time as Winter's expansion on October 28, 2022. Interestingly, almost no other talk about the title took place, and no detailed explanation was given as to why the title was delayed by 1 year, as well as the changes that have taken place in this year. If you ask me, it's unlikely Capcom has made the slightest difference to the game, according to its history of playing its own PvP games at Resident Evil franchises. The show that was playing in the background also didn't make any difference. I think Capcom delayed its release just to launch the game alongside Winter's expansion, because even if a new map had been added to it, it would have been shown in the video that was posted on Showcase. In any case, there is still about 4 months left until the game is released, and we may see new shows. Perhaps there wasn't enough time to showcase the game at the Capcom conference. But all of these possibilities are expressed with a very optimistic view, and the only time determines whether they are right or wrong. But personally, I am unlikely that this game can break the heavy spell of Resident Evil Online titles. Of course, I would be happy if it could prove otherwise to me. In general, it should be said that we have a year full of Resident Evil content ahead of us, and it is truly a very attractive time for fans of this franchise. Resident Evil 4's remake version, which looks extremely appealing, and Resident Evil Village's added content also looks like an exciting and enjoyable experience like the original game, which will keep us entertained until Resident Evil 4 launches. What do you think of Winter's expansion? Was this DLC frustrating for you, or did it meet your expectations? Let's talk about it in the comments section.